The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
I'm Mary Rozak. This is Albany County News. I'm the Director of Communications for Albany County. And in the next about half hour or so, we are going to talk about something that's been in the news quite a bit. You've heard about criminal justice reform. We've also read some horror stories, heard some horror stories, particularly when it comes to those who are survivors of domestic violence and other violent acts. Joining me today is Karen Ziegler, the Director of the Albany County Crime Victim and Sexual Violence Center. Karen, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Mary.
Is it truly a Happy New Year when it comes to something, I'm jumping right in, something as serious as what we've heard with criminal justice reform and some of the stories of those who have been able to survive abuse? Suddenly, there are all kinds of ways that they may, in fact, feel like they are being abused yet again.
I think that a lot of our victims have serious safety concerns. By and large, I think the criminal justice reform is a wonderful thing. I think that it definitely supports communities and those low-level offenders not being separated from their families and their sources of support. But when it comes to those interpersonal violence, the sexual violence and the domestic violence, we're very concerned that some common crimes have not been excluded from the bail reform. So the felony level crimes, yes, the judges have discretion and they can hold someone over. But a lot of our, for example, for our domestic violence victims, if they have an order of protection and that's violated, well, it's criminal mischief. It's a misdemeanor. So those types of repeated offenses against the domestic violence victim and their family don't rise to the level of the consideration for the bail reform. So the person will contact the police, say they're violating the order of protection, and it could be an appearance ticket. It could just be a summons. It could be just very minor. And we're concerned that the very typical behaviors that batterers often engage in won't be caught with the new bail reform.
And as you say that, driving into work today, I heard something like that, where someone had been arrested. There was an order of protection that issued, and later that day, that person picked up because violating the order of protection.
Yes.
What good then is an order of protection? I guess that's the question. What
is the question?
I mean, that might be, I'm guessing, is that what some of the people that you see or that you've talked to, are they saying that? Are they asking that question?
We've honestly asked that question for a long time. To be fair, an order of protection is a piece of paper. It's the justice system has said to this individual, either a full stay-away order, stay away entirely, or in no illegal contact. So don't engage in any illegal behavior with this individual. I'd like to think that the person could refrain from illegal contact. They would have in the first place. But there are still two options. So it could be, there's lots of reasons why one might have one type of order of protection versus another. But it is just a piece of paper. It doesn't stop a bullet. It doesn't protect an individual from a behavior. But what it does do is it gives them some leverage. It gives them the opportunity to contact law enforcement and request that order of protection be enforced. So if a person does violate it by driving up and down the street or coming to their door or having phone conversations or email contact, whatever the conditions are, that the victim can contact law enforcement and say they're violating the order of protection. They provide the order of protection, they provide proof, but then law enforcement can then arrest that individual for violating. And what that does is it escalates. So it could go from misdemeanor to aggravated criminal mischief. So it could increase the consequences for the offender to such a point where they may be arrested, they may actually get more jail time. So it is just a piece of paper, but I think it's just the accumulation of charges and hopefully community acknowledgement that this isn't acceptable behavior, that this is a problem, this is problematic behavior, and this individual has to stop this because they are harassing, they are offending, they're stalking, they're doing all these things to around power and control issues for their victim.
Mm-hmm. Recently, I don't know, in the last couple of weeks, there was an incident in Troy that was on the news where someone was arrested and accused of some kind of property violation, and basically the comment that was made was, well, I'll see you in a couple of hours, and a few hours later that person was arrested again for doing physical damage to some other, or charged with doing physical damage to a car, I believe, or some piece of property. That's when the discussion came up, and it piqued my curiosity. The discussion came up about a cooling off period and how important that is. And the discussion then morphed into particularly those incidents that involved violence.
Yes.
How important is it to have the ability to arrest someone and let them cool off in a jail cell? How important is it from the perspective of someone like you who is seeing and hearing from victims and their concerns?
I'm going to say it's a complicated answer to your question. I think that for if it's a relationship violence, I'm not sure that individual cools off. I think that this is cooling off suggests to me this is an anger issue, that somehow this person was upset and then they're going to de-escalate. So let's just say it was two individuals. You took my parking space and I'm furious and I vandalized your car, and that I might benefit from an opportunity to cool off, to de-escalate. So if I get to sit in court, for a few hours or overnight or what have you of the weekend, I'm definitely going to be able to reflect on my behavior and my poor choices. I think more often than not in a relationship, it's not about cooling off. What we like to have the offender arrested is that it potentially gives them the opportunity. I don't know that many of them take that opportunity to reflect on their behavior and consider alternative behaviors, but what it does allow is for the victim to reach out to their resources and do some safety planning, make accommodations, leave if that's what they choose to, change the locks, fix the broken door, fix the broken window, do the things they need to do to have themselves and their family safe. So that cooling off period is probably less around the batterer regaining control of themselves, because they always have control of themselves. Interpersonal violence, domestic violence is about power and control. It's not about anger. But what it allows is it allows the victim to take control and to make some decisions for their own safety and that of their family. So that's the piece that's incredibly valuable, and why we like to see the offender held separate, and that the person can come back to whatever their living circumstances are and make whatever accommodations they need to make.
So what have you been hearing in the early weeks since this has taken shape? Because we know on the legislative level, we have on the state level, there's a push for reform and changes. And the governor and the legislative leadership have said, they'll take a look. They're not going to move hastily into something, but they're going to take a look. What have you been hearing so far?
We're hearing there's a lot of concern for victims, and I think that it's the unknown. It's new, and people are concerned. We haven't had any horror stories. I'm going to knock wood. We don't want any of our victims, or we don't want anyone to be the face or the name that is the impetus for wide-scale change. But our victims are frightened. They're very concerned. One of the things that will happen with the new discovery is that the potential for witnesses' personal information, their names and their addresses and ways to contact them, will be provided to the defense attorney. Now, granted, the defendant is not supposed to have access to that information, but it's going to be on the documents that will be in the room. So might a defendant take an opportunity to identify who the witnesses are and how to reach out to them? Absolutely. Could that lead to witness intimidation or violence against the witness? I think the potential is there.
We've heard in Albany County already the fact that the defendant's attorney could go to a victim's home.
Yes. there is this opportunity for the defense attorney, the person representing the defendant, to have access to the crime scene. It hasn't unfolded yet, but for us, a worst case scenario is a defendant represents themselves pro se, that they are acting as their own attorney. And let's just say that this was an encounter of a sexual assault, and they potentially could petition the judge to have access to the victim's residence, to their bedroom, to their car, to wherever the crime took place. Now, we'd like to think that a judge would use their very good and well-intentioned decision-making ability, but things will unfold and we don't know what will happen. But as it's written, the defendant can petition the court to have access to the victim's most personal space where this crime occurred, potentially re-traumatizing and triggering the victim all over again.
So how do you talk to your staff and advise your staff and prepare your staff for the inevitable day when something like this is going to come up?
Yes. We've always done safety planning for our domestic violence victims. We are now looking at making sure we're doing that with every victim because we don't know what's going to happen. So all of our staff have had a crash course or a refresher course in safety planning and having that be very, very personal. So where in the past people might not have thought that was necessary, we're suggesting that it is necessary and that they work with us and take the steps they need to best ensure that they will be safe and to have those contingencies thought through ahead of time. It's difficult for any of us in the moment of crisis to know what our options are. So if we planned ahead of time, we put steps into place, we're thinking that they can better prepare themselves and better take care of themselves should something happen.
Yeah, one of the stories that I read in the local paper is in neighboring Saratoga County, where a young woman, the perpetrator of the violence against her was let out. He was being held and was let out. And, one of the things that she indicated to the newspaper is she was actually thinking about having herself committed to a psychiatric facility because she couldn't think of anywhere safer.
Yes.
That sounds rather extreme, and yet
it reflects the terror she has towards this individual because, yes, if she is inpatient somewhere in some facility and therefore this person won't have access to her, think of the desperation that suggests, that this person can't think of any place better to protect herself from this individual than to be committed. And as wonderful as our mental health professionals are, that's being institutionalized, being placed in an institution is a traumatic event in and of itself. And if she is willing to consider that just speaks to me of her level of fear and the fact that we as a society are not doing anything to mitigate her fear or keep her safe.
So what would you like to see happen? And as the director of the Crime Victim and Sexual Violence Center, part of that is an advocacy role.
Absolutely.
What do you want to see happen?
I would like there to be more. I like there to be an acknowledgement. A lot of times we'll talk about that the purpose of bail is to ensure a return date to court, and I think that is absolutely true. But I also think there is a public safety role that bail can perform. If we, as a society, if the judges, if the defense attorneys, and with the DA's office can identify that this person is a public safety risk, as a risk to an individual or a family or the community, I think that there is a place for bail in those circumstances. I think so. Therefore, I think that we need to acknowledge that this is a public safety factor that when we consider bail, I think there needs to be greater judges' discretion over what charges can be considered for bail. I think we need to build in those provisions. I'd like to re-examine the list of crimes that do fall under the bail statute and make sure that they are sufficient to capture those crimes that are most likely to be charged against those domestic violence perpetrators and sexual violence perpetrators.
Have you spoken with the DA's office?
Yes, we have. In fact, we've had some wonderful meetings with the DA's office. They've been very, very proactive in working with us around discovery and other things, and they're doing their very best. But the caseloads are overwhelming. In fact, I just came from a meeting, and law enforcement was talking about how it's impacting them, and the DA's office was there, and we're talking about the hospitals and their records, and it's it's really impacting. I think it's going to have a ripple effect to the entire community in ways that maybe were not considered or were not addressed.
So it certainly is something that, I mean, I'm, like I said, hearing the stories and reading the stories, I mean, I was frightened for these people. And I don't know, what is going to happen. And when we talk about, once it's mired in policy and mired in the whole legislative system, you wonder.
Absolutely. We are always concerned for the safety of our victims. We do the best every day to advocate for them individually and with the courts and with any person who will sit down long enough for us to advocate. But this definitely has raised our concerns in the system's ability to help them stay safe.
Let's talk more about the Crime Victim and Sexual Violence Center. My guest today is the director of the Albany County Center, and that's Karen Ziegler. Karen, it was a busy year, 2019.
Yes.
For you.
Yes.
What did you see anything, or did anything about 2019 surprise you in terms of the numbers, in terms of what was happening in your world, in your day to day?
I think we're seeing a lot more reporting to the hospitals, and we're happy to see that. I don't want to say I think that the number of sexual assaults and domestic violence assaults has increased. I think that people are reaching out for help. They believe that it's there. I think the Me Too movement has been instrumental in encouraging people to seek services. I think people are coming sooner. They're recognizing that their help is available, and that if they do go to the hospitals, they do make those phone calls and call the hotline, that we can help them. So we're seeing an increased number in people going to hospitals. We're seeing them come in sooner, in 24 hours or less, which is great. That way they weren't sitting at home alone by themselves, worrying, wondering, afraid. They're knowing that help is available, support's available, and they're seeking that support. There's been a shift. We had seen a lot of child-on-child sexual violence. That there's been a little bit of a shift of that. We're seeing teen-on-child violence, and I don't want to in any way suggest. I don't know what's more frightening. It seems a little more predatory. Like a teenager on a younger child. We're seeing a lot of adult on child violence, sexual violence particularly. That's always a concern. So we're seeing there's been an increase in some of the reporting on campuses. And again, I don't think it means that there's more assaults happening on campuses. And that's sexual assault. It's also stalking. That's also the dating violence. I think that people are recognizing problematic behaviors sooner, and they're not tolerating it, and they're not explaining it away, and they're not ignoring it. I think they're saying, no, this isn't okay. I don't deserve this. This behavior is outside of what is appropriate, and they're reaching out and they're reporting it and they're getting help. So I think that's very encouraging that our community standards are changing, and we're beginning to have those important, tough conversations that this is not okay, and I don't deserve to be treated like this. So
the message is getting out, and people are listening to that. You briefly mentioned Me Too, and I know that we talked about that in the past, but I would be remiss if we didn't talk about it now again with Jeffrey Weinstein on trial, as that is going on. Your reflections, give me your thoughts on where we have come from the first that we heard about the allegations against Jeffrey Weinstein, and where we are today, the fact that he is on trial.
I think it is wonderfully encouraging to victims to have Harvey Weinstein, a very powerful man, being held accountable. I remember as a young child hearing about the casting couch, and the fact that it was, I think, actually incorporated into television and movies as an expectation that people, particularly women, were subjected to the expectation that they had to offer their sexuality to get a part, and that was just, there's this understanding to now where we don't tolerate that, and that is called criminal behavior, and that Harvey Weinstein does have a trial date. Bill Cosby is still in jail, and I think that is significant. I mean, I know he's appealing it, but I think it's significant, and we're listening more to our victims, and we're allowing them to say, that this wasn't regret sex, this was sexual violence. This was a powerful person abusing their power and their privilege and sexually assaulting people that were perceived to be less powerful, and all that system around that individual that were aware and complicit in the assaults, in the continuation of these assaults, often more than once, and then over time. So I think that it's really holding our entire society, whether it's a Fox News, or whether it's an individual like Harvey Weinstein, or whether it's college campuses. I think we're really looking to our institutions as well as our individuals to say, we need to look at this differently. We need to protect people differently.
And it's interesting that the response, I mean, particularly when we think about Cosby, which is several years old at this point, right? Message is still the same, but
yes.
When we say his name and we think about him, we think about all of the various programs and series that he'd been involved in,
yes.
and the reaction right away by many networks. No more rerunning of the Cosby Show. No more. I mean, you can find it, but
yes.
for the most part, it was pulled.
Yes.
Do you think that's the culture, the changing time?
I think so. I think that we're not able to brush under the rug or shrug it off, or that winking, well, it wasn't as bad as it seems. No, it was as bad as it's alleged to be, and this wasn't okay, and lives are destroyed. I think that's the message that used to be given to, and I'm going to gender this, young women, to say, are you sure you want to destroy his life? Yeah. Well, how about the fact that her life was destroyed? Her life has been altered. And I think if we have to ask that question, it's not about, well, do you want to destroy his life? Well, no, this individual made that decision to hurt this person. If anyone destroyed that person's life, it was him. She's just claiming her life back, and she's not willing to live as a victim. She wants to transform and be a survivor. And I think that's a very powerful shift.
And there's been quite a bit of this. I mean, if we take a look at the whole scandal and the gymnasts,
yes,
and the literally tens of dozens,
yes,
of young women that came forward, and you look at the doctor who really was not remorseful in any way, shape, or form when he was being sentenced. It's incredible. It's incredible. I am talking with the director of the Albany County Crime Victim and Sexual Violence Center, Karen Ziegler. Karen, Aaron's Law. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. Some of the things that you've been talking about, and some of those who are survivors of various types of sexual abuse and other violence, would fall under something that Aaron's Law came out, and that's something that you have a responsibility with area school districts. So let's talk about that first. What is Aaron's Law?
Aaron's Law was legislation that was passed that requires school districts to provide education to students, to teachers, to faculty, to parents around educating them around child abuse. So this is an obligation to the school districts, and we would love to partner with them to help educate the children and all of their staff and faculty, as well as parents, on dynamics of abuse, what resources are available, and how we can help them. I think one of the issues that we have is we don't want to train children to not be abused. We want them to have childhoods. What we want to do is we want to work with children, educate them about what is acceptable, how to have body autonomy, how they can have control of their own bodies, and what consent is, and recognizing when they're not giving consent. That's critically important. But we also really want to train all the adults around them on how to keep our kids safe. It should not be the child's responsibility to keep themselves safe. Right. It should be the adults around them, the community, collective community, about identifying behaviors that are concerning and not allowing that child to be abused.
So is this similar to when your folks go in with our bullying prevention?
Yes.
And so what would a school actually approach, or a student body? How would they approach you and the center to get you to come in?
We're creating a number of different things. So we're doing outreach. We're going to be outreaching the schools. We'll outreach the principals, the PTA, the nurses, health teachers, anyone who actually we think would would help us get into the school system, because we're free, and we're trained on evidence-based best practice curricula that can meet the school's needs. So we are trained to do this. We want to do this, and again, let me say it again, we are free. They can use us as best as possible, so we can work with the children, we can work with the faculty, the teachers, with the PTAs, with the parents, anybody who will allow us to educate them. So we're creating, with your office's help and that of IT, we're creating some outreach materials. We're creating pamphlets and brochures that can outline all the different things that we can do to help support them, and that we want to partner with the schools and have them choose what will best suit their needs. What do they need, and then how can we help them meet that need? We can do different curricula for different age groups, and again, it's all evidence-based, best practices identified, and we're poised to jump in and help the school districts.
So as with anything, there is always going to be resistance, I'm sure, by some. How do you, and in this day and age, people will probably still scratch their heads and say, don't people know what's consent is, and don't kids know? I mean, it really comes back to the basic age-old question and power, as you've talked about so many times. So has there been any resistance? And if there has been, is there, you have to very quickly, I would think, be able to explain why this is so critical.
Absolutely. And I think the resistance has been more around, they're busy. And we know that. The days are packed, they're jammed full of lots of things, and they have all these different other requirements that they have to meet. But we'd like them to take this requirement as seriously as every other requirement. And for an example of consent, if you have ever seen a child and they're with their parent, and someone comes over, a stranger to the child, but maybe it's a neighbor or a coworker or a relative, and the child's a little hesitant, a little fearful, a little shy, and yet the parent's kind of dragging them out and saying, say hi to so-and-so or give so-and-so a kiss. Well, that's not consent. The child, that's actually taking away the autonomy of the child.
Sure.
So that's a very small example, is when you say, you know what, let the child own that they're fearful, that this person, they don't want to maybe jump into this relationship, and allow them. So you know what, I know you'd like to have so-and-so give you a kiss, but I want to wait and see if they feel comfortable. So we can revisit that in a couple of minutes or something, but right now, would you feel okay to wave at somebody or just say hi from where you are, and allowing the child that kind of consent? We do an activity called consent tea, which is, if you're asleep and I pour you a cup of tea, would I pour it down your throat if you were asleep? No, I wouldn't. You could say, yes, I want a cup of tea, but you could later change your mind. I still don't force you to have a cup of tea. So when we take the idea of consent and we make it something like that, people can understand, no, if someone is passed out, they're not consenting. Someone can consent, but then change their mind. They can consent to a cup of tea today, but not want one tomorrow. And I think when we talk about consent under those circumstances, people understand it a little more clearly.
Sure.
Than if we just talk about that very amorphous idea of what consent is.
Because that's got to be very difficult, for kids.
Absolutely.
In the quick minute or so that we've got left, Take Back the Night. Every year,
yes.
Big march and rally.
Yes.
Coming up in a little while.
Yes. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, so the third week of the month we're going to be having our Take Back the Night. We'll have it at the Washington Lake House again, Washington Park Lake House. It's a wonderful, wonderful one. We love the community to come out. We have a lot of the colleges, campuses come out, and we'll march through the park, and we're usually around Lark Street in that general area, and the businesses come out and support us, and we have a lot of residents who are excited. So we're going to hope for beautiful weather. Come on out and be a part of our movement.
And when you are there doing that march and rally, what is the main message that everyone there is getting out?
We want people to know that we as a community will not tolerate or accept violence in any form against anyone. That's what we want to say. We are taking back our streets, we're taking back our night, we're taking back our bodies. We will not tolerate violence.
Karen, the Crime Victim and Sexual Violence Center, our website is probably the best place to go if people want to find out more.
Absolutely. We'll have everything posted.
Or a general phone number. Do you want to give one?
Sure. It's 518-447-7100.
All right. Thank you very much for joining me today. Karen Ziegler, the director of the Albany County Crime Victim and Sexual Violence Center. I'm Mary Rozak. This has been Albany County News. We'll see you again soon.